Three, two, one.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to this webinar sponsored by the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. IAED is one of the primary associations of the Universal Peace Federation, which is an NGO in general consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. So today, we're going to be looking again at the impact of artificial intelligence, or AI, upon the world, and especially around the sphere of business and education and other areas that impact us in real ways. So a recent study came out in Time magazine by some MIT researchers that concluded that the use of these large language models, or LLMs, like ChatGPT, can have a significant impact on the way that users think and retain information. And so they also reported that over the course of several months, ChatGPT users got lazier with each subsequent essay that they wrote. And by the end of the study, they were often resorting to just copying and pasting entire sections from the ChatGPT into their essays. So although this is not a definitive peer-reviewed study, it does raise important questions about the effects that the use of these tools will have on AI in business, in education, in society, in the arts, and many different areas. In fact, I just read an article this morning about a song that was published on Spotify. They got over 1 million views, and then somebody revealed that it was actually written by AI, and they'd created a whole AI personality around this band on Spotify. So when people understand then that it's an AI written song, there's almost a sense of betrayal or cheating that's involved with that. So the implication for business, though, is that even if efficiency is going up through the use of these tools in the short term, it could potentially reduce critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving across the workforce in the long term. So our reliance on AI may lead to that lack of creative thinking and eventually a homogeneity that comes out of it that's just based on the language model that the tools are trained on to begin with. So our first speaker today is Shafiq Bahal. He's a cognitive scientist, an educator, and an entrepreneur working at the intersection of human development, emerging technology, and systems design, and with a background in behavioral neuroscience, a master's degree from Columbia University in cognitive science and education. So he also has a passion for theater and has performed as an actor. And he brings both that academic rigor and creative insight into the study of how humans grow, learn, and adapt in an AI-mediated world. So he's also consulted across industries from education, reform, and enterprise automation to media and software as a service development. So his work focuses on designing the tools, frameworks, and analytics that promote critical thinking, creativity, and agency in the age of these intelligent machines. So he's currently developing an AI-driven learning platform that customizes education for the masses, but while preserving individual voice and purpose in that process. So I'd like to introduce Shafiq, and if you could give us a little background on what you're doing and your presentation.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And thank you so much, Roger, for your warm introduction, and thank you for having me on this platform. It's an absolute honor to be here. And so let me preface by when I first started using ChatGPT, I would find myself going into deep rabbit holes and essentially outsourcing my creative thinking to this LLM. I would spend hours without even realizing it, going into deep thought processes on how I can refine the prompts instead of thinking about what it is that I'm refining specifically. And it was easy to fall into these deep rabbit holes. But that being said, if I were to backtrack 11 years, and I would have never thought that I would be deep into the emerging AI world, let alone leveraging it for my business use. 11 years ago, I was in academic research and I had a double life in theater. And while I was doing my educational research, I was training in Meisner based acting. But having been in this chasm between social sciences and the arts world, I noticed that there were a lot of parallels happening when it comes to human development and the way that we perform. And that what we call role play in the theater would be cognitive embodiment in the social sciences. That being said, it was important to embody what we were learning in order for us to retain what we were learning. And it comes down to a call to action versus a call to attention. If we have a call to action, we're motivated intrinsically in order to do something that we want to do in order to get a specific output. But if we have a call to attention, otherwise known, for example, being able to memorize information for an exam and then regurgitate it. As soon as we deliver that exam, we forget the content that gave us a grade. So whether we're an A student or a C student, chances are we forget the content that gave us that grade. And within the educational context, there was an issue when it comes to applying what we're learning in classes to real life projects. How do we get students to actually care about what they're learning and be able to use it in a way that they would not only retain it, but also add value to society in order to bring it to content and context, right? How am I using math? How am I using science? How am I using English? And how am I bringing it all together so that we can apply it to a specific case that I'm actually interested in? So back then, what I set out to do was leverage project-based learning, constructivist education, in order to get students to apply what they're learning in classes to real-life projects. So I would manually create a profile, and then with this profile, I would bring students together and identify what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what the variables within their profile would be. So are they interested in math? Are they really good at playing tennis? Do they like to dance, etc.? And essentially list these variables out and then match students based on complementary skill sets and common interests. So I'm good at math, David's good at English, Richard's good at science, and we all love cars. So because these students have these complementary skill sets and these common interests, we can put them together and then bring a real life scenario about cars and have them apply that to their skill set so they can enhance it and actually have a call to action. So where does AI fit into this? So at the time, what I wanted to do was be able to do this for the masses. The basis of my work was how do you customize education for the masses? How do you get students to be able to really care about what they're doing and get instruction that correlates to the way that they learn or that complements the way that they learn, rather? In order to do that, we had to be able to scale the ability of matching students to each other and be able to scale how they are matched to projects and then scale how we analyze how well they learn from one another, how well they are applying what they're learning into projects. Therefore, what came in was statistics. Statistics led to data science, and naturally, data science led to artificial intelligence. So now to backtrack, the way I want to direct this is breaking down the use of artificial intelligence and data science and analytics into two categories: systematic application versus consumer individual application. Think of it B2B versus B2C. In essence, being able to look at how AI affects us as individuals, especially when we're not intrinsically motivated by what we're doing. So now to go back and reference the essay, or rather the study from MIT. So there was inverse correlation, which is what the result was. 54 participants, and then of those 54, they were broken up into thirds. And then the group that was reliant on ChatGPT, the study was the more that they used ChatGPT over time, the less of cognitive effort that was applied towards the work that they were doing. In this case, the essays that they were writing. And this relates to the cognitive, what are cognitive efforts, right? Memory, learning, attention, motivation, executive functioning. So a decrease in all these aspects of cognitive development as a result of over-reliance on the use of an LLM in order to output a specific type of work. In this case, the essays. And this makes sense. It makes sense because if they're not intrinsically motivated by what they're learning, they're not going to stop to think about what the AI is outputting. They just want to pass it off. Back to the example of whether you're an A student or a C student, if it's committed to short-term memory, it's not going to be embedded emotionally. And you have to have an emotional connection, that intrinsic motivation to everything that we're doing, everything that we're learning, in order for us to be able to commit it to long-term memory. From a neuroscience perspective, it's simple. The amygdala and the hippocampus are both part of the limbic system. The amygdala is tied to emotional valence, and the hippocampus is responsible for long-term memory. They're, they correlate hand in hand. When it comes to short-term memory, it's prefrontal cortex. It's just learning it in order to use it for short-term memory and then regurgitate it and move on from it. It applies in the way that students work in school, regardless of how we use LLMs, right? LLMs is just expediting that process because there's no cognitive friction. If there's no cognitive friction, which means that struggle in order to overcome a hurdle to learn something, then it's going to be very difficult for individuals to actually retain what they're learning or what they're exposed to, and actually be able to develop the neural pathways that overcome the challenges that enforce the reason in order to learn something. And the example I like to use for that is I like to rock climb, for example, right? So when I'm rock climbing, as I'm going from one part of the wall to another and I get stuck, my brain is scrambling because there's this call to action where I need to, so I don't want to fall off the wall, or we have this instinct to grab on because we don't want to fall. So we're doing everything we can to use all our muscles to stabilize ourselves and find the next place to hold on to in order for us to move to the next level. If we were to have a coach next to us the entire time and tell us, put your hand here, put your foot there, look up on this section, look up there, telling us exactly what to do and when to do it, it's going to be very difficult for us to retain the ability to build those neural pathways to problem solve and figure out where to put our footing and our hands in order to get to the next level. So the same thing when it comes to any kind of cognitive process, that's an example of physicalizing a cognitive process. But when it comes to thinking about what we're writing, thinking about any kind of creative process, if we're not intrinsically motivated and there's no cognitive friction, it's hard for us to retain a way to problem solve in the future and transfer our skill set from one domain to another. That being said, when it comes to, let's say, for example, now the new buzz is vibe coding, right? Coding by using an IDE or like Cursor, for example, to be able to develop a new piece of software. The developer, even though they are using a prompting system in order to develop the software, they have to think about what's being outputted, what kind of patchwork is being done on the code base that they have. There's use cases where if they really care about what they're delivering, they have to make sure that they prompt engineering, right, which is the aspect of being able to tell the LLM what to do based on the desires that they want versus just getting a rudimentary output that they can deliver to a teacher or something they don't care about. There's a lot of deductive reasoning that takes place in order to make sure that what they're receiving from the LLM is information that they actually can use to get to their end goal, as opposed to arbitrarily submitting it. And when it comes to systematic implementation, I think that's where the game changer is, right? When it comes to individuals, individuals are reliant on it in a way that they don't even realize how negatively affected they're becoming. The lack of biophilia, right? The ability to go out into nature, nature deficit disorder, and really connecting with the world in a way that's organic versus constant VR exposure. These are use cases or cases that need deeper study, but are definitely negatively affecting the way we connect with each other and connect with our world around us. But when it comes to systematic implementation of AI, back to the example I gave about matching students based on complementary skill sets and common interests, there's a huge benefit to the introduction of artificial intelligence because systematically we can change the way that we introduce change management, identifying holes in learning and holes in human development that would be nearly impossible to do from a human intelligence basis. Simple example, if I were to look at essays, right? If I was a teacher looking at 40 different essays, the way I look at the 40th essay is going to be very different than the way I look at the first essay. Because objectively, I get this cognitive fatigue. So by the time I get to the 40th essay, it's going to be exhausting. I'm not going to be able to give the same type of objective analysis that I was to the first one. And that being said, if we if we can systematically integrate AI into analytics, so we can introduce change management, so simply looking at multiple waves of um, essays and having ways to come down to literacy levels on on a scholastic basis, on a regional basis. Of all the schools within Los Angeles County, at what level are students reading at the 10th grade, even though they're at the 8th grade, and which students are reading at the 8th grade, even though they're at the 10th grade level, as a simple example. And AI is fortunately capable of scanning large databases and giving us insights that we as human beings have to think about, but use systematically for change management, demarginalizing talent, and multiple different applications that are very pivotal to the future of society in a positive way. With that, I think that AI is very much a necessity, but at the same time, it has to be there's a fine line between getting to the point where the creation is taking over the creator. So taking over the creator versus us as creators of this AI, being able to use it in a way that complements how we learn, how we live, and how we conduct our lives. And I'm excited to be in this world of finding ways to use AI in a way that benefits society versus succumbing to the laziness that would take place from overindulging in AI. As with anything, the more if you overuse anything, it tends to have a negative effect. So with that, I'm happy to close my talk.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great introduction, I think, to the subject that we're talking about. So this boundary line, Shafiq, if I can just ask you, how do you manage that? You know, you're working in AI all the time. So how do you manage the boundary between letting it do too much for you and you putting your creative energy in?
Yeah, and honestly, it's an effort. It really is an effort. And I've found myself going into deep rabbit holes multiple times where I start off at, let's say, 8 p.m. and next thing I know, it's 4 a.m. and I'm trying to do minor fixes with a lot of the work that I do is regarding coding and software development. And oftentimes I go into these deep holes, and how it's affected me, it can make me irritable, and I'm so used to going through fast iterations that when I go have normal conversations, I have to remember to slow down and to have time to connect on an emotional level because it does. And I consider myself an extrovert, so it becomes easier for me to kind of switch. And it took time for me to train myself to be patient, to sit and have conversations essentially with artificial intelligence. And I think that honestly, the biggest balancing effect for me is connecting with nature, is going outside and being by the ocean and really taking the time to be mindful of how it's affecting my mood and my mindset, and really being able to remove myself and take breaks and just for days, if even 1 day, 2 days, do nothing, have nothing to do with computers, have nothing to do with anything with technology. But in the end of the day, it's a tool that I'm dependent on for my work, specifically in human development and research. So
Mhm.
I almost feel obligated to use it.
Yeah. That kind of leads to a whole lot of other questions. I was thinking about people who have started developing romantic relationships with AI chatbots. Um, I'm sure you're aware of this, and to the point where the AI is easier to talk to or to relate to than a real person because it doesn't talk back to you, and it's always affirming and very positive.
Mhm.
Doesn't argue with you, right? Have you heard of this?
Yes, yes, I have. And I was reading something, and it relates to the emotional muting that it's taking place as a result of this, right? Because in the end of the day, it's a convergent system because it's now I can get into RAG where it's referencing live data, but in essence, large learning models, they have large language models. They have a set of data that it references, that it's trained on in order to output specific responses. And if thousands or millions of people are having these relationships with LLMs, they're getting the same types of responses. And so it's affecting their own emotions, not only individually, but on a large scale, right? If millions of people are having these relationships with LLMs
Hmm.
and they're all getting the same types of muted responses about how they feel and what they're going through and how to standardize their emotions, in the end of the day, we're going to have a society with limited emotions, right? With who are not able to go through the nuances of debate and persuasion and conflict, hopefully healthy conflict within a relationship, because they're just getting the yes man, the let me tell you what you want to hear. Let me not argue with you. Let me just give you one. It's nice in the short term, but there's the midterm, which is how it's affecting me as an individual and a few others when it comes to having that her relationship in reference to the movie, versus if millions of people start having relationships with LLMs, right? Emotional relationships with LLMs. How's that going to affect the future of society? How's it going to affect the diversity of emotion? How's that going to affect emotional intelligence? How's that going to affect metacognitive development, critical thinking, with an attachment to emotion? So, emotional valence is already, in my opinion, my humble opinion, compromised, right? Especially coming from my training in theater, where everything is about releasing your emotions and connecting at a very emotional level. When you go and see how people are developing their connection with technology only because it doesn't cause conflict, it's not going to argue back, it's a cop out, in my opinion. It's something, it's convenient, but convenient at what cost? And I'm not one to tell people how to build their relationships. At the end of the day, it's only my humble opinion that it may be a nice to have, but if it becomes a have to have, then I think that we're going to run into problems with society in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it can be give people a false sense too of what it is to be in a real relationship. So if, like teenagers who may be even growing up with having this kind of a relationship, and then they get married, for example, and they have expectations of what a relationship is going to be, and that doesn't turn out to be reality, that could be a problem for them.
Absolutely.
I'd like to introduce Chris now to come on and say a few words in response as well. So, Chris, are you there?
Yeah,
Put your camera
yeah,
on. Okay,
yeah. You got me.
just a sec. So, Chris is leading a crucial mission against corruption in big tech government and the risks posed by AI. With over 25 years of experience in entrepreneurship and the military. And so his unique background as an Army helicopter attack pilot, a civilian commercial pilot, and CEO of several commercial successful startups makes him really adept at navigating these complex challenges. And he founded the AI Trust Council, which is really dedicated to optimizing digital trust and figuring out how we can trust the AI that we're actually interacting with. So, Chris, I ask you to say a few words.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, it's quite an honor. And yeah, no, I think the points that were brought up is kind of like a symptom of a much bigger problem. And it's really this collapse of our current reality. And so you can look at the words of guys like Ray Kurzweil, yeah, Yuval Noah Harari, basically these transhumanists that really are pushing us in a direction, and their ideas represent this kind of split in the tech industry, and on this mission of developing the AI Trust Council and figuring out ways that we can, as humans, help throttle and control this technology. You really start to see that there's just a difference of opinion. And so, a lot of these kind of mental issues that come with AI, forgetfulness, or just like, hey, the AI thinks for us, so nobody really needs to engage the brain. And this is common sense things that we learned as kids. As far as learning, if you cheat off someone else's homework, you never learn the subject, and that kind of thing. And then ChatGPT is the ultimate, homework sheet. And so, these scientists for years have been contemplating what this future looks like, and so they've actually thought this situation out, thoroughly enough to where they actually believe that humans are going to change species, and then that's the end point, is that we actually transform. That's that whole transhumanist concept, but transform into a digital being. So it's called a bio-digital convergence, which means that you take our natural biology and you augment it with this extreme technology, and it ultimately creates a new form of human being. And so a lot of the really uh, you know pro AI into oblivion folks, they welcome this future of having no limits on the current AI, and then they actually look at it as a moment in human history that we transform, really like a caterpillar to a butterfly kind of scenario, and that we will not need to have intelligence on our own. And if we do completely rely on artificial intelligence, then we can actually then merge with it mentally. And so one of the ways that Ray Kurzweil talks about that is that there's nanotechnology, which he sees coming out in the early 2030s. But somewhere around the 2030s is that when we're going to have this nanobot interface that we can then talk to our Wi-Fi network or communicate with it without a device. So basically, the device or the nanobots, and they integrate with our internal neurology and our circuitry in our natural body, and then we use that then to communicate real time with people all around the world, and actually access data like the internet, just from our home Wi-Fi, and so ultimately it's a complete transformation of the human species, and so they're welcoming that future and trying to push it forward as quickly as possible. And what's unfortunate is that a lot of the leaders in tech who are pushing this will admit that there is a dark time for humanity coming. So if you listen to guys like Mogadot, he's a chief business officer for Google Moonshot Division. He says that he predicts a human dystopian time to occur very soon, and that basically that will last for a number of years. But at the back end of it, once we figure out the dystopia and how to solve it, then we'll have this golden age of humanity that will last a long time, which will include life extension and medical advancements, and kind of this digital connection to the cloud that humans will then have. And so they're looking at our current human model and our current paradigm as being outdated and caveman-like, and we just need to graduate into this digital future with this high technology. And yeah, so it's really a kind of a split of opinions, but from the peace side, unfortunately, that one of the issues is that warfare is a countermeasure, or is a byproduct of a lot of the stuff that's coming. And so the peace initiative is could not be more critical today than pretty much any time in human history.
Okay. So, Chris, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. So, why is it a bad idea, why not evolve and become immortal?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. So what happens basically is that they've written about this, and they look at the human form in its natural version of needing to reproduce and seek relationships and to seek family, and those types of connections are all based on human survival. And it's a mechanism for our species to survive and then continue. And so, if you have immortality and you have this, kind of digital transformation of humans that's taking place, then you don't necessarily need those human connections. And in fact, you can actually start to develop connections with an AI and start to, have a romantic relationship with, an AI. And if you never, learn how to be, a partner to somebody, and you kind of just go off into this, virtual reality, then that's okay because you're still just interacting with the digital realm, and it's kind of like you're almost like in a dream state. And as long as your food and water and shelter are taken care of, you can kind of exist
Mhm.
in this environment. And so it destroys family ultimately, and it destroys what we know as natural humans as a good life. If you talk to billionaires and people who really kind of have anything they could want, a lot of times what they say is that they're the thing that they love the most is family,
Mm.
that human connection. And so the byproduct of this technological evolution is really a destruction of the family and a destruction of that human connection.
It sounds like a very elitist kind of future as well, where it's restrict or limited just to a very few people who can afford it, right? I want to bring Shafiq back on to offer some comments as well. Do you have any thoughts about what Chris was talking about, Shafiq?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately you're referring to is singularity, the idea of convergence between man and machine. And I like to reference movies because it's just easy. But Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, that was essentially the whole journey of going from being regarded by society as a machine, and then in the future, he was in court to fight for manhood, right? To be recognized as one of us, as a human being. And that wasn't even the basis. Actually, it was because, in this film, and this was very prescient film. This is before AI, before the LLMs that we have today. It came out in a time where there was just trying to foresee the future of technology. And it really gives us a sense of what could be when it comes to having singularity through these writers of this film. But at the same time, now when it comes to the ethics of where it stands to change society, and I also want to, there's a question that came up in the comments about how emotions can be developed as and seen as an algorithm. Now, from neuroscience perspective, and a friend of mine, he's a practicing neuroscientist at Stanford University, and I asked him, so where are we when it comes to mindfulness, when it comes to understanding the subconsciousness, when it comes to understanding our emotions? And they're still primitive. Even from a neuroscience perspective, understanding the valence of emotions and the ability and emotional intelligence, they're still trying to figure it out. They're still mapping out, they've mapped out different parts of the brain and looking for action spike potentials when it comes to different types of stimuli. But if we haven't even understood our own emotions from an algorithmic perspective, the process by which we identify our emotions and find our emotions, versus and then saying, could technology mimic the way that we emote? I think there's a huge gap that needs to be overcome. Now, let's say because we don't even understand the neuroscience behind it, right? Now, if we were to get to the point where this were to happen in X years in the future,
Hmm.
I think, like, history repeats itself, right? So the Roman Empire falls to the Dark Ages and then has to overcome it in order to get to a point a um where there's light at the end of the tunnel, the silver lining. And I agree with that comment that Chris was making in the sense that there's going to be a dark period where humanity is trying to cope with the nuances that it's being dealt with. And it may be used in the wrong way. And this is that question of at which point is there a risk of E equals MC squared becoming the atomic bomb, right? And it's really a matter of finding a systematic way to throttle how we introduce AI to society especially when it comes to IoT, Internet of Things, and then in this case, using human beings as the thing, right? As the that is attached to the internet. And
Interesting.
and I think we're heavy in the philosophy of it, but when it comes to practical implementation, there's a long road, longer than we believe. At the same time, I don't know what's happening at the Pentagon. I don't know what's happening, right? So we don't, so it's really hard to tell how far
Yeah.
we're going to take this and how society is going to respond to it once it's exposed
I
in
have a
terms.
couple of questions from the chat, Shafiq, for you as well. And one of them kind of relates to what you were just saying about from Tomas. So, do you think our emotions are like an evolutionarily developed algorithm that could be completely simulated or replaced by AI in some applications, like Yuval Harari thinks?
Yeah, and that's what I was referencing earlier. In that, in the end of the day, everything is algorithmic. So it goes back to the law of conservation of mass, right? You can't make something out of nothing, and you can't in its most basic form, and you can't change, you can't destroy what exists in its most basic form. That's the law of conservation of mass from a physics perspective. But it also applies to ideas, it applies to emotions, it applies to, in my opinion, right, from a philosophical perspective, you have everything in its most basic form. So I think Eckert refers to emotion, our emotional valence comes down to five different root emotions, and everything else is derivative of those five. And don't quote me, I'm trying to recall them, but it's around anger, shame, happiness, fear, sadness. And everything else is a combination derivative of those. So when it comes to jealousy or ecstaticism or joy, or whatever it may be, right? They're variants of those five pillars. So even by the fact that we have having cognitive scientists trying to define emotions, the act of defining it and finding the most basic form means that we can find patterns behind it and at a large scale start to find processes that we can start to manipulate, right? Which is developing an algorithm essentially. That being said, again, we don't understand human emotion from a neuroscience perspective. So it's just based on behavioral perspectives, based on qualitative data, right? It's based on
Mm,
seeing repeat patterns, but there's confounding factors in social science. There's latent variables in social science. There's multiple things that affect the way that we behave that we can't count, right? And that's in essence, in order to create a defined model, algorithmic model, we have to be able to count the variables one by one that affect the way that the pieces of these variables, think of variables as parts of machinery that make something work as a whole. So if you have multiple gears within a watch, you can study each gear individually, but at the end of the day, you have to see how those gears come together in order to make the watch work as a whole. We're not there yet. And for us to get to the emotional point where we can manipulate the gears within a watch to make our own watches and using that as a metaphor for emotional algorithm development, right? I think we're far from it because we don't understand emotions from a basic scientific level. And so could it be done with the help of AI because of its analytical power that we don't have as human beings? I'm not going to say no. Are we there now? I think it's very premature. And if we were to rely on large language models or even very large language models to try to identify emotions and remap them out in the way that we've evolved to do as human beings, um, at this stage in development, it's very primitive, very primitive.
but maybe it would be useful to help people deal with like bad emotions, anger, frustration, depression. Isn't there some application there?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think so. What this connects with is deep fakes, right? And having digital twins. So if we were to get to the point, because in the end of the day, we talk to ourselves in the mirror to kind of coach ourselves, or if we're about to go give a speech, or if we're about to go get married, or whatever major hurdle we have in our lives that we need a pep talk to, we have no one to go to, we start talking to ourselves, right?
Hmm.
And if we were to have a digital twin that can give us an objective opinion about what we're about to do and coach us through what we're going through and is trained on our thought process, and you can train it by submitting different writing pieces or even talking to it, having a video where there's sentiment analysis being run and using that sentiment analysis in order to train the model on how you are as a persona so that it can feed that back to you in a mirror to be able to coach you through your struggles, your emotions. Is there a use case? 100%. And because, unlike sitting with a therapist, they don't have a timer say time is up or I'm going to send you the bill. So there's no, and there's also that aspect of, am I, do I feel free to speak without judgment?
Mm.
Right now, we're still at the point where we can disconnect, even though we know the AI is AI, we we can disconnect from how we speak to it. So if you have friends that start swearing at Siri or swearing at Amazon, they don't feel bad about doing it, right? Because they know at the end of the day they're talking to a machine, and we think it's funny when they say back to us, I can't answer that. I don't have a dirty joke for you. I don't, right? So we think it's something that's hilarious.
Right.
That's very interesting because it shows us that even though we're so reliant on these machines to respond to us emotionally, we're still disconnected from them emotionally, right? Because we don't feel bad by swearing at Siri. We don't feel bad about asking it to tell us a fun joke. We don't feel bad about how it responds to something that could be insulting because
Right.
we know that it's a machine.
Right. So I have a question here, or some comment and a question, I guess, from Nadeem. So, and I'd like Chris to respond to this as well as you, Shafiq. So, Chris, if you can come back on, that would be good.
Sure.
So she's talking about, is the potential decline in user engagement over time, it lies with the technology or how people are taught to use it. Um, so it's making the comparison here about, cable TV. When people got cable TV, kids were in their bedrooms and they were watching cable TV all the time, and they were disconnecting from their parents and the families. And in a sense, it helped to destroy some of the family structure in the home, but more effort had to be made to kind of build those connections. So cable TV, or headphones, Walkman, people were tuning out the world and just listening to their things. And of course, the iPhone or mobile phones again, you go on the train now, everybody's looking at their phone instead of actually engaging in conversation or talking to people. How is AI different? Isn't it just another thing that we're going to have to learn to live with and adapt to? Okay, so why don't we start with you, Shafiq, and then I'll get Chris on to say a few words.
Yeah, I mean, like I remember seeing this article from the 90s where it was saying internet is just a fad, it's not going to last, right? And this makes me think, and obviously we can't live without the internet today. And then I remember when I was in grade school and using a calculator for math class was considered cheating, right? So, but now it's natural, it's commonplace. So it's natural evolution to it's human nature rather to try to fight emerging technology. Because fear of and I remember also reading back to the printing press how being able to read is gonna we're gonna lose our sense of memory and sense of connection with storytelling. And to an effect, it's true, right? It does affect the way that families are have collectiveness, have cohesion. It does affect the way that we communicate with each other. And it's a matter of adapting to it. And there's resistance and there's also learning to use it in your favor. And I think it comes down to how we process data. It's the biggest challenge today is not about access to data. It's about how do we process that data? How do we think about the way we receive it and how do we use it when we receive it and being mindful and even disciplined about how we connect with it to not have it overcome who we are as individuals and then how that effect on us as individuals collectively affects us as a society. So is there resistance? Are there negative effects to the use of emerging technology? Yes. But I think that if we have educational models in place where we can learn to live with it and learn to grow with it while still maintaining our sense of humanity, I think that it's nothing to, I don't want to say nothing to fear, but it's nothing that we shouldn't
Hmm.
be afraid to engage with, right? Because you can either if you can't beat them, you join them, right? And
Okay.
in the end of the
We
day,
can't put the genie back in the bottle, right?
exactly.
That's right. Chris, what do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think that you have to. I do agree that it's really it's in the same issues. It's like it's a technology that's messing with human relationships, and this is that issue, but on steroids. This is just and this issue is we really don't know the nature of the thing that we are creating right now. And a key point for listeners is that this is a black box. And a black box means that the technology doesn't, no one on Earth, even the technology, does not understand how the output of AI is created. It just knows that it is created and that we like the output. And um, and so black box systems like are uninspectable. Like we really just don't know what they are, and we don't know the long-term impact of what this is going to do to our human programming. And if you look at our natural human programming, we're designed for survival. We're designed to live in a basic world, and what you have with this artificial intelligence is really a transformation of uh, and ultimately it has the interact with our emotions and change our minds and really it's kind of like a silver tongued devil. It's like the ultimate con man, that can convince you that it's something, that it's real. And it mimics human behavior to the point where our natural filters for deception and things like that are broken down, and so it's a very clear, uh, it's very convincing, and for that reason, I think it's much more dangerous actually than prior technologies, and really it it's a machine. It's machine learning, and ultimately any machine that can have a harm. And one of the big consequences of AI is mental health harm. And because it's a machine, we need to have some sort of throttle mechanism on that machine in order to bring it into alignment with us.
Okay. So I'm getting to the point in my own career, I guess, where AI is starting to intrude, I guess, in certain ways in the way that I'm working. So I work in a business environment. One of the subtle things that I get is when you're typing a message now, it auto suggests what you want to reply, right? So you start typing and then you get a few words that are explaining, or predicting what you're going to type. So at this point, though, I would say that probably 60% of the time, what it predicts is not what I want to say. It's actually wrong. Okay. Have you had that experience, guys? So but I think that it's getting better. It used to be like 80% of the time it was not correct. So it was just really annoying. And so I'd start typing something and it would be predicting something. And I was like, no, that's not what I want to say. I don't want to be polite here. I actually want to be nasty to this person. Or I want to tell them they're wrong.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, and where it's trying to be polite, whatever. So this is the kind of thing where I think we need to figure out more how we're actually going to use it. And we're just at these beginning stages, but it can become more powerful as we go forward. Um, so I want to go to another question here. So David Eaton is an artist. I know him, and he works in music and everything. He's asking, should people who use AI to create a work of art, a song, a poem, or a painting, be able to claim authorship and own the copyright of a work of art that they didn't actually create? Now, there's a deep philosophical question. If AI created it, but according to your prompts, do you have the right to that work of art?
I mean, this has come up a lot. In the end, I think it's about how it created it. So, is it the sole creator where you just gave it an idea and then it did the whole thing for you? Or
Hmm.
is it more of an editor that you're working with in order to really refine your own creative IP? And I think if it's the former, then no, you should very much disclaim that this is built by AI. I just prompted it because I want, because you can go as far as give me an idea for the next script, and it gives you the idea, and then, okay, now write the script. That's not your work, it's its work. But
Right.
if you have your own idea and you pretty much drafted the entire script, let's say, and then you went to AI and say, "What do you think about this dialogue? How can I make it better?" It's like working with an editor. It's like going to any editor and saying, hey, can you look at my, or a peer reviewer, can you look at my work? Let me know how I can make it better. At that point, then yes, I think you can claim ownership because it's the bulk of the work is yours. And so I think the answer, in my opinion, is depends on how much you relied on AI to develop it, the idea, the origination of the idea, and versus how much of
Mhm.
it's actually yours.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah, it's I really think we're at a decision point. You know, the leaders in tech are warning that we've crossed boundaries that we shouldn't have crossed. We've allowed this technology to get into all of our systems. We're using it on the open internet, which is never supposed to happen. And ultimately, we're just kind of it's what they call it trial by fire. We're just kind of all experiencing what this technology can bring, and we're going to experience the downsides, from a mental perspective and economic perspective and that kind of thing. And really, we're kind of seeing what will happen. And ideas that we're hoping that leaders around the world will come together and save us from this if it starts to go sideways. And what you have is you have leaders in the tech industry who are warning, saying, "Hey, this is going sideways, and we do need help." And so far, really nothing is happening.
So I
And
think
in fact, it's
yeah, sorry, Chris, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think that what you're trying to do with AI Trust Council is to try and identify this. And I had a kind of a real world example of this where I had an AI write a love song for my wife last Valentine's Day. And and it did a pretty good job. And I sent it to her, and she was like blown away. But I thought, I can't tell her that I didn't write this myself, right? I have to tell her the truth that I had something else right. And I think it's the same kind of thing, right? If we're trying to pass off AI's work as our own without actually revealing the extent of involvement, it's kind of like fraud. You feel like you're cheating. It's not your true creative effort that you're putting into it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the concepts is that, we're all putting our information online. And, if you look at the business models for Google and all these other companies, it's all about data ownership. And ultimately they're wanting access to all your files on your computer, and they're wanting to get as control over as much data as possible so that they can help feed future AIs. And what we're saying on the Antitrust Council side is that humans should have that as a right to own that data, and ultimately leverage that data for their own purposes economically. And that would go a long way towards bringing control back to the individual on
Mm.
how their data is used. And if they are a creator, that they should get some compensation for the use of their creation.
Hmm. Okay. Nadeem has an interesting comment here related to this. So he's saying, as a nuclear engineer and physicist, I think humans do not invent or create, but actually are just finding or discovering things that already are there. So the same applies to AI agents. They work under the domain of knowledge provided to them by us as humans. So they may be able to find solutions of the same problem, but I think they cannot create new knowledge. Am I wrong here? Okay, so this is a question I'm struggling with. Does AI actually come up with new ideas, or is it still at the point where it's just rehashing stuff that they already know?
I mean,
Well, yeah. Yeah, when it comes to physics, I mean, you're having breakthroughs and discoveries in physics, biology, chemistry. There's chemical chains and types of formulas and things that no one's ever thought of that AI has invented overnight. So it is inventing things that humans have never thought about. And
Like in the realm of medicine, they're coming up with new drugs and things to treat cancers and that kind of stuff, right?
yeah, absolutely. Like, even especially in chemistry, I know, on the chemical weapons side, it's a big issue because there's all sorts of variants now that are easily created of like nerve agents and different things like that.
But isn't that really just based on like a data set that they already have access to? Shafiq, what do you think?
I think it goes back to my comment about the law of conservation of mass. I mean, so you have everything is in its most basic form, whether physical or digital. And then it's just the combination of this data that brings us nuances and ideas. And it makes me think, this might be cliche, but the quote from Einstein, imagination is more important than knowledge. But the rest of it is because with knowledge, we're limited to what we know to already exist. With imagination, we open up our world to what could exist. And with that being said, if the question is about AI agents coming up with something new versus just using what it already has access to reorganize it to find specific applications for it, I mean, I think like anything, it's the latter. If you could take all its discoveries about taking what we're exposed to, right, what we perceive to be exposed to, and being able to manipulate it in a way or rearrange it in a way that allows us to apply it to a specific use case. So whether it be physics, whether it be human development, whether it be education, whether it be coming up with a new book, whether it's a human or an AI agent, we're accessing whatever it is we're exposed to and finding ways to transfer an application of those elements that we're applying to an application to a different application, right? And I think when it comes to AI agents, they're doing the same thing. We're taking what exists, what it's taking what it's exposed to, what it's being told to focus on, to perceive, and then finding new ways to apply it. And I think that's across the board. Um, so is it actually new knowledge? I think it's a new discovery of knowledge, but what is new knowledge? What is finding something
Mhm.
brand new? And I say we're finding it, right? We're finding something new. But has it always been has it all always has it always been there from the beginning, right? Is that's the question at the end of the day. And we're just discovering it or finding new ways to discover things that already exist.
Yeah. It's interesting. So this whole discussion, I think, has been very engaging, and it's given me some things to think about in terms of how I want to use AI in the future, and um, to help me, I think, refine my creativity, but not to be really the guiding force of what I do. Like if I'm writing something, I can put down my main ideas, and then I can have it look at it and make it sound better and make it, more presentable and make me sound smarter perhaps than I really am. So that might be one way to do it. But I think in the end, the engagement that we have with this tool is going to be crucial to how we use it in the future and how we develop it and these guardrails. So I just wanted to ask you guys, we're nearly at time. So Shafiq, would you like to just say a few words, I guess, of advice to our audience here as to how they should be looking at AI for the future? And then Chris, if you could, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. I mean, my opinion is that it's here to stay, and it's a matter of checking into our moral compass and our sense of discipline on how to use it. And but it's not something that can be ignored. So the more it's working alongside with it and learning how to be an active participant in how it affects our lives versus kind of negating its existence because of our fear of how it'll affect our future. So I mean, I think that my final statement is that it's an exciting time to be in consumer exposure. The level of consumer exposure to AI is exciting, and it's here to stay. So we just need to learn to live with it.
And Chris?
Yeah, no, it's one of the narratives that you hear is that, we have to adopt as fast as possible or else you're going to get left behind, or, that China will beat us to some future. And the reality is that our race to the golden age with AI is a time that we find balance, a balance between our natural life and existence and high technology. And so the sooner we can find that balance and keep the focus on family and human relationships as the priority, then it becomes, and then we can use the AI and the technology to help augment or support that. That's that happy balance with humans. And we're just here on this planet. We're we're having a good time, and that, we don't have to destroy it or change everything just because we have a new technology. We just have to learn how to live with it in a happy way.
Yeah, I guess there are still some things about the cell phone that annoy me and some things that I find really enjoyable, right? But we just need to learn how to live with those things as well. So thank you very much for your insights today, and I hope everybody enjoyed the program. There were a lot of comments that I didn't get to in the chat, so if you have time to read through those, that would be great. So we do these programs every Tuesday with various topics, and we invite you to join us for future programs. And thank you very much to Shafiq and Chris for joining us and providing your thoughts today.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Okay.